starting late. I know that you guys would have left Clarendon fairly early this morning to get here. So I'm very, very happy to welcome you. And remember that this is your Parliament, it's your Senate. You're always welcome here. And any Friday that you think you want to scull a day from school, you tell your teachers tell your teachers that you want to come and spend the day in the Senate. Okay? So welcome to you all. And remember, this is your Parliament, you know. So you're always welcome here. And you look very nice, nicely turned out. So it's very nice to see you. So could I just ask the students to sit, and the 3 teachers remain standing. Teachers, thank you very much for bringing the kids out. I know it requires some amount of planning, and with the state of the road, sometimes there is some anxiety from parents and so on in bringing the children out. So we thank you for making the time for the students to bring them here. And the same thing I said to them applies to you. It's your Parliament. You're always welcome here. And if you have other grades that you want to bring, I'm sure that you have coordinated with the clerk and so on. And you're always welcome here. So thank you for bringing the kids out. And the one thing I would ask when you're going home, ensure that the driver of the bus or coach, whatever it is, conduct the coach in a manner that is appropriate for the fact that he has the future of the nation in his vehicle. Okay? Thank you very much. Before I move to the question or the item oath of allegiance of new members, I identify in the well of the Parliament, Ms. Mina Israel, who is well known to all of us. She is in fact a special advisor to the Dean of the University of the West Indies. Welcome, Mina Israel. And there is Ms. Nicola Ebanks, who is the fiancée of one of our new senators, and Sharon Hay Webster, former Member of Parliament. I also take the opportunity to welcome Mr. Diallo Dixon, who is the husband of Dr. Dixon, one of our new senators to be sworn in, and other members of the friends and family who have taken the time to come and spend with us this morning to witness a very important event. I apologize. I apologize for the late start, but that is the nature of things here. I am also informed of the resignation from the Senate of former Senator Lex Campbell, former Minister of State in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and Senator Natalie Rodriguez Campbell. She asked me specifically to say Rodriguez Campbell, you know. Senator Campbell Rodriguez, both of whom served in the Senate with distinction over the last number of years, and I'm sure that you will join me in wishing them all the very best for their future endeavors. And no doubt, both will continue to serve this Jamaica land we love in whatever area that they identify. There are two persons to take the oath of allegiance this morning.
Just before that, President, I take it that you have received communication from the Governor General. Just for the formality, because I haven't heard it, and the Senate record ought to reflect that.
The two persons concerned are Dr. Dana Morris Dixon and Mr. Abka Fitzhenley. With the greatest of respect, Senator Brown, I wouldn't proceed down this path without being informed by King's House and getting the relevant documentation. But like everything
just wanted to make sure.
No doubt
President,
you want to identify yourself to the new senators early.
Abka is a Man U supporter, so we're well acquainted.
So could I ask both persons to come forward? Oath of allegiance. Now, I'm going to just make it clear from now so that I don't get into any problem. It is Morris Dixon. Inevitably, I'm going to call you Dixon Morris, but
Dana Morris Dixon.
I, Dana Marie Elizabeth Morris Dixon, do swear that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to Jamaica, that I will uphold and defend the Constitution and the laws of Jamaica, and that I will conscientiously and impartially discharge my responsibilities to the people of Jamaica. So help me God.
Abka Lincoln Ramon Fitzhenley.
I, Abka Lincoln Ramon Fitzhenley, do swear that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to Jamaica, that I will uphold and defend the Constitution and laws of Jamaica, and that I will conscientiously and impartially discharge my responsibilities to the people of Jamaica. So help me God.
I'd like to just offer a brief congratulations to both Dr. Morris Dixon and Senator Abka Fitzhenley. Welcome you both to the chamber. We trust that the manner in which you have carried out your allotted task elsewhere in the private sector and the manner in which you have approached your various professions elsewhere, we trust that that enthusiasm and competence will be brought into this chamber to the benefit of this Jamaica land we love as a whole. So welcome. We have met quite a few of the staff already. The clerk, of course, and her staff are here to facilitate your contribution to the country. And as President of the Senate, whatever it is that we can do to make your stay here helpful, we will provide it. Thank you very much and welcome. Senator Hill, I recognize you from a seat other than your own.
I thank you so much, Mr. President. And I would very much like to add my comments and gratitude to my colleagues who are clearly moving on to wonderful places and positions, most likely. I speak, of course, of Senator Natalie Campbell Rodriguez and Senator Leslie Campbell, Minister of State. We wish them both well. We know that they will do well. But this morning, Mr. President, I'm especially happy to welcome Dr. Dana Morris Dixon and, of course, the very well-known Abka Fitzhenley as new Senate colleagues. Dr. Dana Morris Dixon, and I have to say this because she knows for sure, and others might know, that there are lots of people who wanted Dr. Dixon to do all kinds of things. And there's only one man, I think, in Jamaica who could trump them. And he did. Prime Minister, the Most Honorable Andrew Holness, has selected her to be a senator with us. And there's good reason for that, Mr. President. She's completed, of course, her BSc in Economics, first-class honors from and MSc Government in Distinction from the University of West Indies. She also is a graduate of the Joseph Coble School of International Studies. Now, that's very important. Let me tell you just one person who went there. Condoleezza Rice. See, I got you. Coming up to the other one, though. Working my way into it. Dr. Condoleezza Rice studied at that Joseph Coble School of International Studies. And at the time, the focus was on Russia. So Dr. Condoleezza Rice is really an expert in Russian affairs. At the time when Dr. Dixon went there to do her PhD, the focus was on China. And she clearly is now a scholar of China, among many other things. But, Mr. President, I must tell you that where she really, really got educated was at Harvard Business School. She did her executive MBA studies there, and I'm just happy that she is from that very noble institution, and she's now here in Jamaica to serve us. She's done many other things. She's served, of course, with the Bank of Jamaica on looking at the National Risk Assessment for Jamaica in 2021, which is a key component of Jamaica's FATF action plan, something that we have had to address here many times and quite recently in the Senate. She did that, though, as an executive of Jamaica, the JN Group. The bank she started, JN Bank in Britain, she did all kinds of stuff for JN, and she's still doing that now, I think, in the insurance field. So Dr. Dixon is really accomplished. And she served, of course, as a senior public sector roles in the Office of Prime Minister. And at JAMPRO, Dr. Dixon clearly comes with a great deal of experience, and her career as an academic at the University of the West Indies, where she taught several courses at the undergraduate and graduate levels. During her tenure with the UWI, she also worked on the Jamaica Economy Project, which was a precursor to the successful Caribbean Policy Research Institute. Given her passion for education, she served on the Jamaica Education Transformation Commission, and she also serves on the Archdiocese of Kingston Education Commission. She's also a member of the Board of Directors of Campion College, her alma mater. I could not say that. So see the hand claps come. Clear, Mr. President, it probably is not known to the leader of opposition business that Monroe College does not accept women, although our sister school is Hampton. So we're very pleased. Claim, Senator Brown. Mr. President, it is my very distinct pleasure, and I know it's the pleasure of my colleagues, to welcome Dr. Dana Dixon as a colleague, a Senate colleague with us, and please make her very welcome. Mr. President, it's rarely that I have to stand up here and talk about somebody new who is already a national figure. Abka Fitzhenley is known as Mr. Breaking News. Whether you like it or not, anytime you hear breaking news is Abka. Senator now, Mr. President, Abka Fitzhenley. He has Lincoln in there and Raman, but we'll stick to Abka Fitzhenley. We're very happy to have Abka with us. Abka actually studied law at the university, but never practiced it. He decided to go into, I think, the public defender for a short while, and then went to what is now, we now know as an institution nationwide, where he was Mr. Breaking News, and still continues in that area. And Mr. President, Senator Brown will want to speak to you afterwards, but right now we're speaking about Senator Abka Fitzhenley, and we're very pleased to welcome him, the work he has done, the public service he has done. He speaks on Jamaica to the international press, BBC especially, and about Jamaica. And I have known him for a long time. We have seen him grow up into the man he has become. We congratulate him for the work he has done. And Mr. President, it is again my distinct pleasure to welcome Mr. Abka Lincoln Raman Fitzhenley as the new senator in the Senate. If it pleases you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Senator Hill. Senator Bunting.
Thank you, Mr. President. On behalf of the opposition, let me start by also thanking outgoing or former Senators Leslie Campbell and Senator Campbell Rodriguez. In fact, I served with Senator Leslie Campbell in both the lower house and in the upper house, and he really was always one of the most pleasant and personable people to deal with, and I really appreciate the cordial exchanges that we've all had with him over the years. I think he was definitely a favorite of the ladies on the opposition side. And Senator Campbell Rodriguez may be a little more combative, but I think we also enjoyed a good relationship with her, and I wish them both success in whatever endeavors that they're going on to, which I gather will be announced shortly. You know, Mr. President, just before we formally convened this morning, I went over and welcomed our two new colleagues, and I shared with them the fact that for the 5 terms that I've served in Parliament, the Senate has always been known as the chamber with the more collegial relationships. Even those of us who came from the combative House side we've tended, or let me certainly speak for myself, I have mellowed a lot since being elevated. Sometimes I'm provoked.
You need to radiate that mellowness.
Very occasionally I'm provoked, but I try. But I try, and so I commended it to them. And you know, one of the reasons why sometimes we really wonder why we can't, you know, enjoy this environment all the time. As I see the relative of Senator Fitzhenley, my former colleague Sharon Hay Webster. Most people here would not know that Sharon was my first lieutenant in my first campaign in Southeast Clarendon in 1993. And I can tell you, we were very close, and there was no greater campaigner on my behalf than Sharon. And over the years, even when Sharon has switched sides, people will know that I never have anything negative to say about Sharon, because we have had such a close working relationship over the years that you know, I sort of think of her as family. Yeah, and similarly, I look forward, that as a side, you know, with age you get soft and sentimental. But I want to especially welcome first Abka, Senator Abka Fitzhenley, and I hope he doesn't mind me calling him Abka, because I've known him for a very long time. When he just entered the media landscape, and I'll say he was then just a mere wisp of the man you see before you today. I tease him that since then I have lost a few pounds and he has found them. But we always enjoyed a good professional relationship back when I was in government, and we still do, and I look forward to the contribution he will make. He brings a successful track record in the media landscape, and I hope he will be as successful as a legislator. And to Senator Dana Morris Dixon, I want Senator Auburn Hill, one day Busher, already enumerated her stellar resume. Mine, I say you were sitting and laughing with us this morning in the opposition senators conference room for quite a while. So, you know, you were, that's why I couldn't find him. But he enumerated, the acting leader of government business enumerated the stellar resume of Senator Dana Morris Dixon. And we have one more financial sector expert joining, well, I won't say she's the expert, joining other practitioners of us. Myself, Senator Hill, Senator Webby, who have all done stints in that area. But she's much more current and much brighter than those of us who are here. So we welcome you joining us here. And I feel especially proud that another Campionite has joined this house. You know, I say that that you would understand, Mr. President, because you are one of those who have been here for a long time. And I was the first Campionite.
Not that long either, you know.
I was
not
the
that
first
long.
Campionite.
And first of all, Senator Brown and I are proud Jamaica College students. We used to pass Campion and don't allow them on the number 3 bus.
I think I was the first Campionite to be sworn into in Parliament in the lower house in 1993. And since then, there have been so many that have come along, but I still feel especially proud and welcome Senator Dana Morris, and I am sure she will make an outstanding contribution in this chamber. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Bunting. Senator Dr. Morris Dixon.
Mr. President, I stand here very humbled today to be in this esteemed chambers and to be with my colleagues. I thank the Honourable Prime Minister for asking me to serve in this way. I know very clearly this is not about me, it is about service. I have been given a lot of tremendous opportunities in my life, and I believe it's important that all of us in here who have had all of these opportunities that so many didn't, that we use our skills and our talents to serve our country. I pray that I will serve my country very well. Thank you.
Senator Fitzhenley.
Mr. President, I want to begin by expressing gratitude to the leader of the executive arm of the Jamaican state, the Most Honorable Andrew Holness, for affording me the opportunity to serve in this chamber. It is not lost on me, sir, that the preeminent and quintessential political practitioner in the country and Jamaica's first post-independence born Prime Minister has, in his judgment, afforded me the opportunity to serve my country via this noble chamber. I do not intend to disappoint the expectations attached to that opportunity afforded. I want to thank you, Mr. President, as well, for guidance over the years on matters not touching on concerning media or politics, but life in general, even before my entry into media. And I note your firm but fair superintendence of this honorable chamber.
Thank you very much for that, Senator. And I would like to bring attention of Senator Bunting to that particular remark.
I'd like to thank my family for being here today, my dear partner, Nicole, my cousin Sharon Hay Webster, my cousin Michelle Fitzhenley, my aunt Marie Fitzhenley, and my dear friends who are family, Carolyn and Natalie, who are here today to offer support. I thank them much. I also, as an observer of the Parliament, Mr. President, I wish to also acknowledge the sterling work of our government Senate leader, who is overseas on GOJ business, who has been exercising great efficiency in advancing the work and the interest of the people of Jamaica. I also acknowledge as well the contribution of former Senators Campbell Rodriguez and Leslie Campbell, two committed and talented Jamaicans who have departed this arena, and I have no doubt that they will shine in whichever field they so choose. In closing, Mr. President, I recall in about 1999, approximately 24 years ago, I attended upon this Parliament for the first time at the age of 10 in the company of my late father, who passed away last year. And that piqued my initial interest in affairs of government and governance. And I thought, alas, maybe one day I'd have the opportunity to serve in this chamber. Alas, that day has come. And I will not make a bunch of promises. However, I will say this. I commit to the Jamaican people to, in my deport and energies evinced in this chamber, to do right by our country. Mr. President, I trust that at this juncture, you will accept the assurance of my highest consideration. Thank you, sir.
Just the observation that persons looking on, members of the Senate and otherwise, would have noticed the theme running through both responses. The fact that both recognize the importance of the family and recognize the importance of those who have contributed to their development along the way. And they recognize, both of them, that their individual capacity alone could not have brought them here without the support of friends, family, and connections. And I think it is very important that it is recognized. I met Abka's dad on a number of occasions, and I'm sure he would have found it most interesting and, I dare say, amusing to see his son sitting in the Senate today. And the other thing, of course, is the commitment of both individuals, stated commitment to the service to this Jamaica, land we love. Welcome again. Statements by ministers. Announcements.
Laid on the table of the Senate today are the following: Annual report on audited financial statements of the Kingston Free Zone Company Limited for the financial year 2019-2020. The National Minimum Wage Amendment Order and the National Minimum Wage Industrial Security Guards Amendment Order 2023 under the Minimum Wage Act and their resolutions. The Judiciary Salaries Order 2023 under the Judiciary Act and its resolution. The Public Procurement International Finance Corporation Advisory Services National Broadband Network Project Order 2023 under the Public Procurement Act and its resolution. The report of the Independent Commission of the Judiciary Inquiry and recommendations on the adequacy of salaries and benefits for judges 2021-2023, dated April 2023. The report of the Joint Select Committee appointed to review and report on the Cybercrimes Act 2015, and the quarterly report on the performance reviews of the portfolio public bodies of the Ministry of Transport and Mining.
Thank you very much. Bills brought from the Honorable House of Representatives.
The following is a message from the Speaker of the House of Representatives. To the Honorable Senate, I have the honor to advise the Honorable Senate that on the 10th day of May 2023, a bill entitled An Act to Establish a Body to be called the National Compliance and Regulatory Authority to regulate the processes and practices connected with the manufacture, production, processing, and treatment of commodities for which a compulsory standard specification or a technical regulation has been declared, and for connected matters, was passed in the House of Representatives with one amendment, for which the House desires the concurrence of the Honorable Senate. Signed, Marisa Dalrymple Philibert, CD, MP, Speaker of the House of Representatives.
Mr. President, I now ask that the amendment be approved. We had discussed this and debated it here, and I think my colleagues across the way will agree. So I ask for its approval.
Members should have heard the question from the Honorable Minister.
Yes, I can affirm, Mr. President, that out of the interest of protecting your reputation, we agreed to this.
Well, thank you very much, Senator Bunting. Members should have heard the question. Those in favor? Against? Thank you. Petitions? Papers? Reports from committees? Notices of motions given orally? Questions and answers to questions? I'm sorry. Notices of motions given orally. Minister Hill?
Mr. President, I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the House, I will move the Public Procurement International Finance Corporation Advisory Services National Broadband Network Order 2023 Resolution. It states, Mr. President, whereas Section 3.3 of the Act provides that the Minister may, by order, subject to affirmative resolution, declare that the Act or any provision thereof shall not apply, A, to public-private partnership approved by the Cabinet, second, B, Mr. President, to a national development project, C, in respect of procurement of any class of goods, works, or services, and D, Mr. President, to a public body, as the Minister may, subject to such terms and conditions, if any, specify. Now, therefore, be it resolved by this Honourable House as follows. 1. This resolution may be cited as a Public Procurement International Finance Corporation Advisory Services National Broadband Network Project Order 2023 Resolution. 2. The Public Procurement International Finance Corporation Advisory Services National Broadband Network Project Order 2023 is hereby affirmed. If it pleases you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much. Questions and answers to questions. Motions that may be made at the commencement of public business requiring notice. Motions relating to the sitting of the Senate. Motions for leave to introduce bills. The presentation of bills without the leave of the Senate first obtained. Public business.
Mr. President, I rise to lead a bill entitled An Act to amend the corporate, rather it should be the Copyright Act. Yes, ma'am. The Copyright Act, Mr. President, of 1993, we call it the Act, was amended in 2015 to, among other things, provide persons with a print or hearing disability access to copies or adaptations of published...
Senator Hill, 1 minute. You have, Senator Bunting, you have an issue? You have it? You have copies of it?
Yes, we're just determining the order of responding.
Okay, sorry, no problem.
Again, Mr. President, the Copyright Act 1993, the Act, was amended in 2015 to, among other things, provide persons with a print or hearing disability access to copies or adaptations of published literary or dramatic works with the permission of the copyright owner in accordance with Jamaica's obligation on the Marrakesh Treaty. The Act is being further amended to enable greater access to books and other copyright works by blind, visually impaired, or otherwise print disabled and hearing disabled persons in Jamaica. These amendments are also intended to ensure that the provisions of the Act are more consistent with the Marrakesh Treaty. Mr. President, it is intended that such access to copyright works will empower persons with a print or hearing disability, including disabled children, in private and state homes and those enrolled in educational institutions especially, Mr. President, who would not otherwise have access to such works. The bill clause-by-clause analysis. Clause 1, the short title and construction. This clause, Mr. President, provides for the short title of the Act and directs that the Act should be read in conjunction with the Copyright Act and all amendments thereof. Clause 2, amendment to Section 2 of the Principal Act. The clause deletes the definitions of the terms accessible, format, and authorized body, as the definitions are being revised and placed in Section 51, which is in Part 4 of the Act. The part, Mr. President, provides for the exceptions to the infringement of copyright. Clause 3, Mr. President, deals with the amendment to Sections 51 of the Principal Act. Section 51 is being amended by deleting the current section and inserting a new section to provide for the interpretation of key terms, including the following. 1. Authorized persons means A, for the purposes of Section 65A, a person with a print disability. B, for the purposes of Section 65B, a person with a hearing disability. Mr. President, C deals with a person acting on behalf of any person referred to in paragraph A or B. And D, Mr. President, an authorized body or an organization acting on behalf of an authorized body. 2. Authorized body means the Abilities Foundation of Jamaica, the Jamaica Association of the Deaf, the Jamaica Council for Persons with Disabilities, the Jamaica Society for the Blind, the Ministry with Responsibility for Education, and the National Library of Jamaica, just to name a few. Mr. President, the third authorized person means authorized entity, means an entity in another contracting party to the Marrakesh Treaty other than Jamaica that is authorized or recognized by the government, that contracting party, to provide education, instructional training, adaptive reading or information access to persons with a print disability, or, Mr. President, a non-profit, on a non-profit basis. 4. The Marrakesh Treaty means, Mr. President, the Marrakesh Treaty to facilitate access to published works for persons who are blind, visually impaired, or otherwise print disabled, adopted at the Marrakesh on the 27th day of June 2013. Further, subsection 2, Mr. President, defines who is considered to be a person with a print disability, and subsection 3 defines who is considered to be a person with a hearing disability. Additionally, Mr. President, subsection 4 allows the minister to designate other organizations to be an authorized body. Clause 4, Mr. President, deals with repeal and replacement of Section 65A of the Principal Act. This section allows a person with a print disability or an authorized person to do the following without the consent of the copyright owner. 1, Mr. President, they may translate, adapt, or reproduce in Braille, large print, or other accessible format copyright works. 2, Mr. President, perform in public a copyright work either live or in another accessible format. Or 3, Mr. President, make, access, obtain, import, supply, distribute, make available, and use accessible format copies of all copyright works. 4th, Mr. President, take any intermediate steps to facilitate the making, obtaining, or supplying of accessible format copies. 5th, Mr. President, assist a person with a print disability to make and use an accessible format copyright of a copy of a copyright work, provided that the person with the print disability, Mr. President, has lawful access to that work or a copy of that work. 6, Mr. President, obtain accessible format copies of a copyright work from an authorized body or authorized entity, including by non-commercial lending or by electronic communication, by wire or by wireless means, Mr. President, provided that the accessible format copy obtained is used only for the benefit of the person with a print disability. And Seventh, Mr. President, distribute or make available accessible format copies to an authorized entity, another authorized body, or a person with a print disability in Jamaica or in a contracting party to the Marrakesh Treaty, provided, Mr. President, that prior to the distribution or making available of such copies, the originating authorized person did not know or have reasonable grounds to know that the accessible format would be used for persons other than persons with a print disability. Clause 5, Mr. President, deals with the repeal and replacement of Section 65B of the Principal Act. This section allows a person with a hearing disability or an authorized person to do the following with the consent of the copyright owner. The first, Mr. President, would be to translate, adapt, or reproduce in sign language or other accessible format copyright works. The second, Mr. President, would be to perform in public a copyright work in sign language, either live or in another accessible format. Or third, Mr. President, make access, obtain, import, supply, distribute, make available, and use accessible format copies of all copyright works. And Mr. President, fourth, make subtitled films or broadcasts. Fifth, Mr. President, take any intermediate steps to facilitate the making, obtaining, or supplying of accessible format copies. Mr. President, sixth, assist a person with a hearing disability to make and use an accessible format copy of a copyright work, provided that the person with a hearing disability has lawful access to that work or a copy of that work. Seventh, Mr. President, obtain accessible format copies of copyright works from an authorized body, including by non-commercial lending or by electronic communication, by wire, or by wireless means, provided that the accessible format copy obtained is used only for the benefit of persons with a hearing disability. And, Mr. President, eighth, distribute or make available accessible format copies to an authorized body or a person with a hearing disability in Jamaica, provided that prior to the distribution or making available of such copies, the originating authorized person did not know or have reasonable grounds to know that the accessible format copy would be used for persons other than persons with a hearing disability, Mr. President. Clause 6 deals with the insertion of Section 65C and 65D in the Principal Act. Mr. President, 65C, conditions for accessing copyright works, and this clause provides for conditions that must be met for the provisions of Sections 65A and 65B, exemptions for persons with a print or hearing disability to apply. These conditions, Mr. President, include: 1, the authorized person who intends to undertake any of the activities referred to in Section 65A or 65B must have lawful access to the copyright work or a copy of that work, Mr. President. And 2, the work has been converted to an accessible format copy, which may include the means needed to navigate information in the accessible format, but which, Mr. President, does not have the effect of introducing changes other than those needed to make the work accessible to the person with a print disability or hearing disability. Third, Mr. President, the accessible format copies are supplied exclusively to be used by persons with a print disability or a hearing disability. Fourth, if any person, Mr. President, with a print disability or hearing disability to whom the copy is to be provided is required to pay for the copy, the payment required is no higher than the sum consisting of the cost of the production of the copy and a reasonable contribution to the general expenses of the authorized person with no element of profit. Mr. President, 65D deals with the protection from infringement of copyright. This section provides, Mr. President, that the circumvention of a technological protection measure for any of the purposes referred to in sections 65A and 65B, previously mentioned, shall not be deemed a commission of an offense or infringement of any copyright in that work. Mr. President, the Memorandum of Objectives and Reasons state the memorandum stipulates that the key objectives of the Act are. If it pleases you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Minister Hill.
Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Senator Dr. Floyd Morris.
I want to commence my presentation by adding my quota of welcome to the two new senators. And just to say, Mr. President, that I'm going to move a motion for a Morris caucus so that we will be able to outvote. You see, we have seen the eradication of the Campbell caucus and an elevation of the Morris caucus. So I want to add my quota of welcome to both new senators. And as a long-standing member of this honorable chamber, I offer a piece of advice to my colleagues to say that this is a chamber that we are charged with the responsibility of upholding the Constitution, and it also gives us an opportunity to establish our names and our credentials in this august body. And I say, make sure that whilst you are here, you make your mark, because at the end of the day, if you don't make seminal contributions, you'll just become another person in the Senate, and no one will remember that you passed through these hallowed walls. And so, Mr. President, I turn to the substantial issue at hand, which is the amendment to the Copyright Act. And it is a very important piece of legislation that I support fully, because as I disclosed elsewhere this morning, Mr. President, I stand to benefit significantly from the enactment of such a legislation. And why do I say so, Mr. President? It's because the bill seeks to make material more accessible for persons with print disability, those who are blind, those who are visually impaired, those who have hearing disabilities. And it is a fundamental challenge for us. And you can imagine, Mr. President, in an era where access to information is a fundamental right, and persons who are deaf and those who are blind have been marginalized because of the restricted access to printed material, etc., because of their disability and their limitations that have been placed because of copyright laws and treaties. So, Mr. President, it is very important for us, and I just want to show you how it has affected us with a disability, especially those who are pursuing education. Because, Mr. President, it's only between 1 and 7% of printed material globally that is accessible, deemed accessible to persons with print disability, those who are blind, those who have visual impairment, those who have hearing disabilities. And you can imagine how difficult that is for these individuals to participate in society on an equal basis with others, as stipulated in the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And that is why in the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, it expressly mandates state parties to put in place measures to ensure that persons with disabilities have access to information. And, Mr. President, I want to share my personal experiences, because in my career in academia, I have to read extensively, Senator Gale. I do a lot of research, and it requires me to read extensively. For example, when I did my PhD thesis, I consulted over 150 pieces of literature, ranging from journal articles to books, over 100 journal articles, and had to read over 50 books. And none of them, Mr. President, was in an accessible format for me as a blind person. I had to get these materials scanned and then converted into an accessible format where the speech program that is on my computer, JAWS, could read it. So you're talking about transferring information from text to speech. It is a very tedious and difficult process, because if you don't have the technology to give you that support, you are in serious problems. And that is the gravamen of the problem that we are confronted with in the community of persons with disabilities. And based on international law, it is illegal to convert people's work into an accessible format without getting the requisite permission. And thankfully, in academia, when you are writing your thesis, you are required to acknowledge your source of information and recognize them in your literature, so that gives you some form of coverage. But in terms of converting the book or the article into an accessible format, you are committing a breach. And a lot of that is taking place because state parties have not put in place the requisite measures to accommodate those individuals with a disability. And it's the same, whilst I cite the example of myself and the difficulties that I have had in academia, I have managed to navigate the space, and, thankfully, Mr. President, the University of the West Indies has put in place measures to give me the requisite support in terms of my work. But I tell you, Mr. President, it is not easy. Because even in writing a journal article and submitting it to international journals, it is so difficult to access the websites, because you put the information in, and when you click on an icon that says next, it's coming up color-coded, and you can't move if you don't have a sighted person there to assist you. So for me, who get up and work late in the morning, I have to really thank God for a supportive wife, because it is she that has to come and assist me to move to the next stage. Not a lot of disabled persons have that sort of support. And it restricts the participation of persons with disabilities. So, Senator Hill, this piece of legislation, you're passing it now, and I don't know if you understand the significance of it. Because if properly implemented, will redound to the liberalization, what I call the liberalization of thousands of Jamaicans who are being marginalized because of the restrictions that exist in terms of copyright. But I tell you, thankfully, I have found creative ways and means to navigate the academic space to the point where I'm one of the celebrated authors in the Caribbean, where literature for persons with disability or on the study of disability is concerned. I've managed to write and publish 4 books now and over 20 journal articles in international peer-reviewed journals. But that struggle is a difficult one. It is a difficult one, and people wouldn't understand, because you have a significant body of work that you have to read and review, and you have to contact individuals overseas to get permission to do, to use their work, and so forth. But there is a major concern, Mr. President, that as I reviewed the legislation here, a major concern. First and foremost, Mr. President, before I put the major concern on the table, the language throughout the legislation, we need to make sure that we bring it in conformity to the language guidelines from the United Nations Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, because I see in the legislation it referring, for example, to suffering from a disability. And that is frowned upon by the international community of persons with disabilities and the United Nations. The suggested language is more in line with affected by a disability. Because when you talk about suffering from a disability, I mean, individuals don't really engage, or majority of the population of persons with disabilities don't suffer from a disability. It is the environment that which they operate in that contributes to the suffering. So we have to make sure that we look at the language inside the legislation, and I suggest that wherever we have the word suffering, we look at replacing it with affected by. Then the fundamental concern, Mr. President, is the fact that this legislation seeks to bring our operation, our copyright environment consistent with that of international law, in particular the Marrakesh Treaty. And the Marrakesh Treaty was adopted in 2013. And what it does, it enables persons who are print disabled to be able to access information or literary works in an accessible format. So issues that I have highlighted earlier in terms of print material, or in the case of persons who are deaf, hearing impaired, where there are sound-related material, voice-related material, they can access it through sign language interpretation. And the Marrakesh Treaty, once you are a signatory to it, it allows you as a country to be able to access copyright material from other jurisdictions that have signed and ratified the treaty. And herein lies my fundamental problem, because, Minister, from all checks, Jamaica has not signed the Marrakesh Treaty. Jamaica has not signed the Marrakesh Treaty. The Marrakesh Treaty that is in the bill has not been signed by Jamaica. If it has been signed by Jamaica, Minister, it has been done without the community of persons with disabilities being informed. Because up to this morning, before I came, I made sure that I checked, because last year when the Jamaican delegation met with the United Nations Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, the concluding observation, which was published in the online, the committee expressly stated that Jamaica needs to sign the Marrakesh Treaty. read the concluding observation, and it should have been circulated to the ministries of government, it should have been circulated to cabinet, it should have been circulated to the parliament. I accessed the information because I am a member of the committee, and it expressly states in the section dealing with Article 30 that deals with leisure and the participation of persons with disabilities in cultural activities that Jamaica needs to ratify the Marrakesh Treaty. But I have checked a number of the disability organizations, and they are not aware of us signing the Marrakesh Treaty. And if the Marrakesh Treaty is not signed, then the benefits of this legislation is negligible, because it is going to be restricting us to literary works in Jamaica. So what has to happen, Minister, is that the Jamaican government have to sign the legislation post haste. And I am calling on the government to do so with immediate effect. Because if it is that you are going to make the disabled community, those who are print disabled, benefit from this important piece of legislation, you have to sign the Marrakesh Treaty, because that is how we are going to be able to access published works in countries such as the United Kingdom, etc., European countries that have signed and ratified the treaty. I urge the government not to delay in the signing, because you have come to the parliament now and passed this legislation, which I am going to support. But if you don't sign the treaty, then we are going to have some serious problems. It is going to be very restrictive and limited. Right? And so, Mr. President, and this is one of the things, Senator Gale, why I ask all the time, and I say to the government, consult us. Consult us. Even if you don't like Floyd Morris, because Floyd Morris is an opposition member, I am ready and available to give any support to the government when it comes on to disability issues. Because I am talking about almost 16% of our population who are struggling and being marginalized for various reasons. And I am here in this parliament fighting for and advocating on their behalf. And I want to make sure that the best is available for every single person with a disability in this country. And so my hands are outstretched to you at any point in time to call upon me for guidance where these matters are concerned. Because I am, as I said, I have a whole body of literature that I have published on disability issues, and based on where I operate from at the University of the West Indies and at the United Nations. So the support is there for you. And so, Mr. President, I support the legislation, but I equally repeat my call for the government to ratify the Marrakesh Treaty so that this piece of legislation can be optimized. May it please you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Senator Morris. Senator Dr. Floyd Morris.
President.
Thank you, Senator Gill.
Let me first use the opportunity to welcome our new colleagues. Dr. Dana Morris Dixon and Senator Abka Fitzhenley. Can I still call you Abka? And let me take the opportunity also to express gratitude for the work that would have been displayed by both Senator Natalie Campbell Rodriguez and Leslie Campbell, who were my parties in the Senate. We worked good together, and we are going to miss them, and we wish them the very best in their future endeavors. President, when it comes to matters concerning the disabled community, I'm always compelled to speak. Recalling, I would have indicated in this parliament that my mother, for 35 years, worked with the disabled community. And so, every Friday morning, she turns on the TV to either listen or watch PBC-J. So she's listening to these proceedings now, or might be watching the proceedings. And so I have to prove to her that I'm attending to her work. And President, how I know that she continues to watch these proceedings, A few weeks ago, she said to me, Cav, you can't talk to your friend Lambert Brown. But Mr. President, this is a very important legislation. In the Jamaica Copyright Act of 1993, made amendments in 2015 that sought to comply with the obligations under the Marrakesh Treaty. And its specific aims were to increase access to published works for people with print disabilities. The amendments allows for a creation and distribution of accessible format copies of copyright literature and dramatic works for persons with print or hearing disabilities. Senator Morris can indicate to you that it ranges from including braille, audio, and even large print. And to ensure copyright owners are adequately compensated for the use of their works in accessible formats, the amendment includes provisions for the payment of royalties to copyright owners or their representatives. And this also ensures that the creators and owners of copyright works are fairly compensated for their contributions, whilst also promoting greater accessibility for published works for persons with disabilities. Mr. President, there are some very brilliant persons living with disabilities. And Senator Morris, I agree with you. This notion of people suffering with disabilities, this expressed notion and how it's being characterized is inappropriate. And what we must do is to ensure that every reference to it is consistent, because it is just merely persons living with disabilities. Mr. President, Senator Morris spoke about the Marrakesh Treaty, a very important treaty. And as a state, we try to operate in accordance with treaties and conventions. And for the provisions entailed in treaties and conventions ultimately become law. This is a situation where it may have been where we're making the valiant attempt to make into law these provisions and then move to signing on to the treaty. What it does, in my mind, is suggest an expressed intention to the more convenient matter of making it law. And so, I also support the idea that within reasonable time, we must sign on to these treaties and ratify them. And President, there are often times, we take very long. We sign on to treaties or conventions and take very long in making it law. And so a real determination has to be made in terms of the action in relation to the time frame. When we sign on to the treaties, when we ratify the treaties, when we make them law. Mr. President, so today we are taking a very critical step in making provisions to protect the disabled community, to protect those who would have been disadvantaged over the years in this critical space, to make up for that gap in learning. You have many students in a classroom that cannot keep pace because of this disadvantage. And they are eager, they get the support, but this critical support is so badly needed. Mr. President, to ensure effectiveness of these amendments, we have to encourage certain support. I want to encourage the establishment of a system of identifying and serving the print-disabled population. Let's determine a database of who is needed, how many persons require the support and this access. Mr. President, it makes no sense whatsoever that we create the amendment to these legislations to provide the support and don't promote the use of the accessible formats. Sometimes we just make legislations, effect them, and don't provide the requisite support to create the enactment. So we have to promote the use of the accessible formats such as the Braille, the audio, large print for persons with print or hearing disabilities. We also have to encourage the copyright owners to grant permission for the creation and distribution of the accessible format copies of their work. But most importantly, Mr. President, for this transition to be effective, we have to not only do a campaign, but also to educate. To educate the need for the use of the transitions involved. So it would be important, Minister, through this that we establish some sort of an implementation guideline. that will lend support to the effective use for greater access of the, Senator Morris spoke about the books and all those other variables that come into play. This not only affects the disabled community in the use of the equipments, but also for the elderly who might need the support and the use of some of these equipment. But, Mr. President, the legislation in Clause 3 spoke of the authorized body, and it gives a list of different entities and agencies that are going to be required to lend support. And in lending support, there are some types of equipments needed by institutions that are going to be designated as these authorized bodies to provide education, instructional training, adaptive reading, or information access to persons with print or hearing disabilities. And they may vary, Mr. President, depending on the need of the individuals being served. However, I want to highlight some of the commonly used equipments and assistive technologies that may be needed. The screen readers and magnifiers. These software applications and hardware devices allow the visually impaired individuals to read and navigate digital content, such as e-books and even websites. You have the Braille display and printers, and these devices convert the digital text into Braille, allowing the visually impaired individuals to read and write. And you see, every time you see Senator Morris come here and he boasts and he carry through, I'm still trying to figure out that new eyeglasses in terms of what it can do. Is this one of these new devices? It is. It is. I don't even know if it's capturing our actions, unknown to us. But, Mr. President, and I've seen in listening to him, the use of the text-to-speech software. This software reads digital text, allowing individuals with visual or reading impairment to access information. And the assistive listening device. These devices, such as the hearing aids and the cochlear implants, that amplifies the sound for individuals with hearing impairment. Mr. President, I list these items because the authorized bodies are going to require to be able to obtain these items. And so, there's a good thing where to make it accessible, the question of affordability is of concern. But I want to suggest that there ought to be some level of exemption and customs duty support to provide the access to these technologies in an area to provide the services to persons for those operating with print and hearing disabilities. And also, in the question of providing training, sir, these institutions, to ensure that they are equipped to provide the effective service to the disabled community, they can partner with international organizations to gain support in understanding how best we can make this transition. Mr. President, it's an important legislation. It's a crucial amendment. And so, we must always take the opportunity to identify areas that are critical and crucial in making the life of the disabled community easier. We must make steps to do so. And ironically, sir, just this week, I was driving along a particular roadway, and I noticed a utility pole planted in a particular area. Now, the light and power company, when they plant or erect a utility pole on a sidewalk, I've taken note that just picture the sidewalk and the embankment. And they place the pole at the entrance of the embankment, at this first part of the embankment. That's right where you would have the entrance to a property. In my mind, the visually impaired has an expectation that the utility pole is planted there. But I saw a utility pole in the middle of the embankment. And I'm saying to myself that that is, in my mind, out of the ordinary. Because if that visually impaired person anticipates that the pole is usually planted at the beginning of the embankment, that's an expectation. They don't expect a utility pole to be planted in the middle. And so, if the light and power company has a particular standard, then the telecommunication company who would have planted that pole outside of the standard must follow what the standard applies. And so, what we must do, and this may have been something that comes under your town and planning. What we must do is that we must conform to certain standards in the protection of the disabled community. Mr. President, outside of this, it gives us the opportunity to revisit the Copyrights Act. And I call today with specific interest to the entertainment community. Because as a trade unionist, there's a concern that has been raised with me in terms of the equitable treatment in terms of remuneration. The equitable treatment in terms of remuneration for those artists and performers who perform overseas. And so, we have to deal in terms of the rate based on the performance of the various artists. And there's presently, my understanding, no express right of equitable remuneration for performers. And so we may want to consider, in the revision of this particular legislation, to examine that particular provision. It is only reasonable and fair that they get value for their performance on a global basis. And so, I want to encourage various associations and support groups and advocacy groups would have raised the concern. And I'm just sending signal, Minister, because I know that you're a minister who normally take these things on board and pursue them. And so I want to send the signal today. I want to send the signal today. But this is a very important piece of legislation in terms of the objectives of the amendment in making provisions to protect the disabled community. And I look forward to its implementation. And one of the things that we must do, we must be able to come back into this Parliament at the appropriate time and provide a report as to how it's working. May it please you, Mr. President.
And she knows you're present.
I can see her this weekend.
Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Gale. Senator Fraser-Binns.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I really had no intent of speaking today, but I had to rise to join my colleagues to extend welcome to our newest colleagues, Senators Akbar Fitzhenley and Dr. Dana Morris Dixon. Yes, another Morris in the House. And I am particularly pleased at Dr. Morris Dixon's appointment because she represents another strong, accomplished female in our midst. Mr. President, perhaps I should say that I was compelled to speak, or I was forced to speak by Deputy Leader Scott Motley, because she knows how much I care about the creative industries, and she likes to tell me that this is my area of study, and so I should use it. I, however, thought that the issue today was more in line with Senator Dr. Floyd Morris, and so he should speak. Nonetheless, Mr. President, I want to extend my own appreciation for the content of this bill today and how pleased I am that we are making this type of amendment to the Copyright Act. When I looked at page 2 at clause 3, and I noticed the accessible formats that I mentioned here, Minister, what jumped out at me was sign language. Because within the disabled community, we talk, and perhaps of my own affiliation with Senator Floyd, or Ray Charles, as we call him from campus days, we know so much about Braille, but the sign language is something that we do not spend enough time on. In fact, I recall sometime way back, I attempted to learn sign language, and then I realized it really is not an easy thing to learn. And the delinquent student I was then, I still am now, I did not pursue it. But it is such an important aspect of assisting our disabled community, and in particular within the realm of access to copyright and intellectual property. As copyright operates, it does so in a way that really limits the access of persons with disabilities to copyrighted work. And this has several negative effects. I mean, Senator Morris spoke about the challenge it has, or the challenge he experienced when he was doing, Senator Dr. Floyd Morris, because I'm now going to have to say first and second name, spoke about the experience he had when he was doing his PhD thesis. And, you know, the thing is that it is not unique to Floyd, because persons at different levels experience this thing. When you talk to even children who are doing common entrance or doing CXC, doing their first degree, they share this kind of challenge with us. And I am happy that we are now taking proactive action to ensure that we not just provide an exemption within the Copyright Act, but that we are giving truth to what we call inclusion of the disabled community, that we are enlightening, that we are engaging the energy of persons within the disabled community. We are building their confidence through access to information, to access to copyright information, which of course has a positive effect on them in terms of their academic achievement, in terms of their employability. And this is something that must be commended. I note some of the bodies that have been listed as authorized bodies. And I see the Early Stimulation Program, among others. And I was particularly moved by that because, Minister, one of the things that we have not done enough of as a country, and Dr. Longmore and I share this passion, is that we have not invested enough in our early childhood institutions. We have not done enough for our young children. And perhaps it's because I have 2 young kids and I understand the demands of children in that age group, or the need to stimulate children in that age group, that I have come to accept the importance of investment in the early years for education. And so when I see the Early Stimulation program, I am particularly pleased because I'm aware of the work that this program undertakes. And I also know the challenge that they have in ensuring that their target achieves its objective. So I'm very pleased about that. Now, on page 5 at clause 4, where we talk about print disability. And it says, for the purpose of providing access to a copyright work in a way for it to be enjoyed by a person with a print disability. Again, I had to single out this one because of the challenge that comes about with reducing or converting to a format that persons with print disability can access. But what was not lost on me, Minister, and I'm really hoping that in your closing you could provide some guidance, was the challenge that these entities will have. Because we know on a regular day, if you go to one of a Xerox shop and you want to photocopy something, just put it in there, the cost associated with just photocopying. If you want to print something, the cost associated with printing. But we're taking it now at a higher level of converting to an accessible format for persons who may have print disability or visual disability, and the cost associated. So I wondered whether in the contemplation of this overhaul of the Copyright Act, whether any consideration was made to the allocation of resources to ensure that the entities here that are listed will have some kind of financial support. Because let us not fool ourselves, as it says, it does take some amount of cash to care. And for us to really achieve the objectives set out in the Copyright Act, we're going to need financial resources, and that is just the reality. So I wondered whether, Minister, any contemplation has been made in terms of providing resources. And when you look again at page 2 and you see the bodies that have been mentioned, I mean, they're mainly NGOs. We're talking about the CDA, the Combined Disabilities Association, the Caribbean Christian Center, the Abilities Foundation, the Society for the Blind, the Macam Child Development Center. These are entities that, for the most part, are self-funded. And they may get some, because I'm not sure, but they may get some kind of stipend from the government. But we are sure that whatever stipend that is given, if any, is not sufficient in their day-to-day. Moreover, to help them as they undertake this new task. And so, Minister, I would really like to know what, if any, provision has been made, and if not, then I am appealing on their behalf that the government considers making allocation for them. I reiterate the call made by Senator Gale in terms of relooking how our custom structure can accommodate the importation of the necessary resources so that these institutions can have them. And this is particularly important, as Senator Allen has reminded me, that we've just amended the Custom Act, and I think it's something that we can look at as well. Minister, I needless to say that as somebody who fully believes in intellectual property rights, I fully support the amendment of this bill. But there's a matter that touches and concerns copyright that has nothing to do with the content of the bill today. But it is something that has been weighing heavily on my mind, particularly when one looks at the discussion that is taking place not just in Jamaica, but certainly the world over in terms of artificial intelligence. And perhaps Jamaica needs to, and in this case the ministry, needs to start considering how, if any at all, we can treat with how artificial intelligence material that are generated are going to be dealt with. We do know that to the extent that there is human intervention, it is copyrighted. But as AI operates now, humans really don't need to do anything. And then you have a product. And I think that as we develop as a country and as we get more and more of our young people, and particularly our girls, involved in STEM, I have no doubt that Jamaica can and perhaps will be the leader in terms of development of AI and the different aspects of it. And I think it is important that we give consideration in a proactive way as to how we will treat with it. Certainly guidance will come from our international partners and WIPO and all the other agents, international bodies, but I think it is something that Jamaica needs to start contemplating as we move forward. And with that being said, Mr. President, I again just restate, as my colleagues before have said, that we are in full support of this bill and the amendments thereto, because we do see the positive impact that it will have on our disabled community, moving them from a place of dependency to independence. And with that, Mr. President, I thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Fraser-Bin. Senator Safar Longmore.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise to add my voice of welcome to our new two senators, Senator Dana Morris and Senator Abka Fitz-Henley. Welcome. We look forward to working with you. And I'm here, however I'm able to help that work. And I would also like to thank Senators Campbell Rodriguez and Senator Leslie Campbell for being a part of our team. I think we got much work done, and I wish them well on their future endeavors. But Mr. President, I rise now to also recognize the effort of this government to be in keeping with the international standards as outlined by the Marrakesh Treaty. And I know Senator Minister Hill has a guide as to the concerns raised by Senator Floyd Morris, and so I look forward to such. But needless to say that it adds to the effort to basically provide equity for persons who are living with disabilities amongst us. Mr. President, this adds to the recent announcement by the Minister of Health, where persons who have physical impairments and disabilities with physical disability in terms of the limb, a missing limb or a limb that is not as functional as it used to be, being provided with prostheses. And I encourage persons who have such challenges to seek such help that is being made available. I also would like to recognize, Mr. President, and my intervention is brief because I could not comment on this, is that in reviewing this Copyright Act, the amendment to this Copyright Act, and the provisions that we're making, I could not see that we don't also provide for persons that we may not even reflect on in this moment. And that is persons who are living with a disability of a mental condition. A lot of creatives, one of the world's most famous artists, Vincent van Gogh, was thought to be schizophrenic. And it had me recognizing and adding another reason to advocate for the review and to hasten that process for the review of the Mental Health Act that would seek to provide for such collaboration with acts such as this to ensure that persons who are having a mental health diagnosis, that their creative work be also protected. I know that it is often not recognized, but we do have, I work with these persons who may have that other challenge. And sometimes you're amazed at the creativity that comes from these minds. Well, but this is my point. This is my point. That as we move as a country to bring equity to persons who are not as enabled, or as I recognize, otherwise abled, that we do so for persons with a mental disorder. And it might not be as obvious to some, but again, the advocacy for the review of the Mental Health Act. Mr. President, of course, I support this measure, and I hope that, as I indicated, that we add the effort to the review of the Mental Health Act. Thank you, Mr. President.
I'll be very brief, like Fraser Benson. I know I must confess that you were departure lounge. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, President. Mr. President, may I also take this opportunity? It's a temporary seat.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry. Thank you very much, Senator Safari Longmore, Dr. Longmore. Thank you very much, Senator Webber. You're recognized. I'm sorry.
Thank you. And just for clarity, Mr. President, I'm speaking from a seat that is not my own. I was ushered in the front row by Senator Arvin Hill. Mr. President, let me take this opportunity to also welcome our two new senators, Senator Dana Morris Dixon and Senator Abga Fitzhenley, both of whom I know very well, and both are from the private sector. Senator Fitzhenley, I think we need to recognize you also as a member of the private sector. Let me say this, Mr. President and colleagues, and I'm sure Senator Bunting and Senator Hill will agree with me that in our career, certainly in my career, we have received a lot of accolades, a lot of recognition as private sector leaders. But let me say that one of my greatest honors in life has always been a senator. I think it's one of the highest recognitions and highest responsibilities that one can be placed on any Jamaican citizen. And I would encourage both of you to prepare and treat it very seriously. It takes time, and you have to prepare. Let me also wish Senator Campbell Rodriguez and Leslie Campbell all the very best. I used to call them my next door neighbors. So I guess I'll get some new next door neighbors. Senator Bunting. You know, we have been, Senator Floyd Morris, Dr. Floyd Morris, we've been discussing various legislation as it relates to disability in this House, and I've been around from 2007 and 2008. And let me say, Dr. Morris, Senator Morris, I have never in my entire career, both locally and internationally, have seen anyone so passionate about disability in all my life. And I really want to salute you, sir. I want to recognize you on that effort. I want to recognize your passion. I want to recognize your commitment. I want to recognize your dedication to the disability. It's something that is really, really should be admired. Thank you so much. I'm thanking you. So, you know, as I look on the memorandum on objects of reasons, Senator Morris, there's an interesting word that is used here, to enable greater access to books and other copyright works by blind, visually impaired, and otherwise printed, disabled and hearing disabled persons in Jamaica. And Senator Gale, you referred to it, that technology is changing so fast with AI. You know, when you talk about printed books, my children would ask me, what is that? You know, so that's something that we need to consider in the future. But you know, I have a little system when I'm presenting in the Senate and legislation is being amended or changed. I always like to think about the long-term future of Jamaica and what is this legislation trying to achieve. So I always use the Vision 2030 as one of my first points of reference in terms of where we are going. And I'd like to share with this honorable House, it is actually in the vision statement for 2030. And it says, the vision statement for persons with disabilities in Vision 2030, Jamaica under the persons with the disability sector plan is. So we are now defining the vision for persons with disability. A society that is inclusive, accessible, provides opportunities for all, and recognizes the rights, the freedoms, and responsibilities of persons with disabilities in the process of nation building. And I think that's a very powerful statement. But Senator Brown, you know, I always use this statement, what gets measured gets done. And I asked myself, Senator Floyd Morris, that I know you are greatly involved with the University of West Indies. And I'm asking it in the form of a question. Who is reviewing Vision 2030 to see if we are on track in terms of what we have outlined here as the vision for disability? I asked the question, Senator Morris, how are we doing? What do we need to improve to get there? Do we have the necessary resources in place? Are we looking at it as like a wholesome, as a balanced scorecard, so somebody can look on it as a placemat and check off? And I believe that the University of West Indies has a great, great role in answering those questions. You know, I have found that if we don't take that approach, Senator Hill, and we approach change in a piecemeal way by the various legislation, we're not going to have transformational change. We will continue to have piecemeal change, but nothing transformational. So, Senator Morris, I kind of throwing that one back at you in terms of we need to say a transformational change. Many of you may not know, and it's very simple. Who feels it knows it, right? My wife had a massive stroke in 2015, November of 2015. So her mobility is limited. And a simple thing like finding parking in the plazas is a big headache. So who feels it knows it? I understand. Right? So I think that we need to look on it as a whole of how we're going to transform the system. And I believe, sir, that the University of West Indies has a critical role to play. So, Mr. President, I want to underscore the inclusive and access from the vision, which are key elements of creating equity by providing all segments of society with the exact resources and opportunities needed to achieve an equal outcome. I'm not sure if it was referred to in previous presentations, but if you look at the Capri report, and I think Senator Morris used 17%, that report actually said 13.6% of the population in Jamaica has some amount of disability. And if you think about 13%, that's a big number based on that Capri report. That population, that sector, most feel that Jamaica is as much as theirs as anyone else. They must feel that that 13% of the Jamaican population must feel that they are equal as Jamaican citizens. And when I say equal, Mr. President, equality means it recognizes that each person has different circumstances and allocates the exact resources and opportunities needed to reach an equal outcome. That's what I mean by equitable. They have access to the same educational as the rest of the population. I think also, Senator Sinclair, if you look at the UNESCO report on disability and education, found that more than 50% of children with disabilities were not accessing education. 50%. This is a UNESCO report, a very scientific study, that 50% of children with disabilities were not accessing education when compared to only 3% of those without disabilities. That is a very sad statement. The report also concluded that providing access to education and training needed is a means of promoting self-actualization and social mobility of persons with disabilities. And I know, Senator Morris, you have been saying that over and over the many, many years. And you know, if you think about that, this would reduce poverty driven by disability. These amendments can have a positive impact on children with disabilities by giving them the exact resources to empower them to get a proper education. So in closing, Mr. President, the passage of this legislation is one of the many actions that we need to take as a country to achieve Jamaica's Vision 2030 for persons with disabilities by creating equity in the provision of educational resources. Obviously, Senator Hill, there's a lot more to be done. A lot more to be done. But this is absolutely a step in the right direction. I'll close with these words, Senator Allen. I'll close with these words. Equality is giving everyone the same pair of shoes. Equality is giving everyone the same pair of shoes. Equity is giving everyone a pair of shoes that fits. I thank you very much, Mr. President, and I support this bill wholeheartedly.
Thank you, Senator Webber. Minister?
Mr. President, I'm very pleased for the support that my colleagues on both sides have given to this very, very important bill. Senator Morris very passionately asked and hopes that I understand really what this bill means. Well, I'm going to make a confession here. I will not understand to the depth and intimacy with which he has for this bill. I completely understand that I would never have that, nor frankly would I have the understanding that even Senator Webber just talked about because of his personal experience with it. But boy, do I really certainly do understand. When I came to the ministry and I saw what was on the legislative agenda, spoke to JIPO, spoke to our legal authorities, Mrs. Sutherland Reid, for instance, at JIPO, Ms. Lily Claire Bellamy and her team, and I said, we have to move certain legislation. If you notice, on a regular basis, I keep doing that. But I encouraged and supported both Ms. Lily Claire Bellamy and her team at JIPO and Mrs. Sutherland Reid and our team at the Ministry of Industry, Investment and Commerce to get this bill to completion and to make Jamaica compliant with the Marrakesh Treaty. And, you know, Senator Morris encouraged us to sign the bill, and I believe that's the treaty, and I believe that's encouragement in good faith. And I accept that. In 2015, when the amendments were made, they were good, but they were not complete and comprehensive enough. We have now, and we couldn't sign the treaty. We didn't want to sign the treaty before we have the bill comprehensively completed. But what we did do is put in law, in fact in 2015, and we made sure that the law in the country provided for much of what the Marrakesh Treaty required. We're now completing this exercise, is to complete the amendments that we need to do and make sure that we then go in and sign the Marrakesh Treaty, and my team, I've charged them to make sure that we carry that forward and get it done very, very quickly after these amendments are put in place. Timeline I wouldn't want to give because just in case, for instance, I'm going to make one or two amendments based on what I'm going to suggest that we agree to. One or two small amendments that Senator Morris suggested, so I'm going to make sure we get that done. But I give you my commitment that when I ask for a charge, they know that I believe that 80% of good management is follow-up, and I have no problem being a Pacheri. So I follow up a great deal. I'll make sure it's done. She doesn't know what a pacheri is. She's from Antigua Bay. No. So, Mr. President, reference was made by Senator Fraser Binns. Senator Buntingham, please your back so you can provide me with some protection. Senator Fraser Binns rightly suggested that we need to make sure that the bodies mentioned in Clause 3 are properly funded. Otherwise, it's not going to get done. Vigilance is on all of our parts. You see something is not being done, my WhatsApp is available. You tell me, I get back on the vigilance. And I do answer my phone calls and WhatsApp. So I'll make sure that as we pass these, I'm not passing these bills. I'm not in here to pass a bill for a piece of paper. We're here to get things done for the people of Jamaica, especially this group of people that really need assistance, and that's why we're leading this charge. And finally, Mr. President, Senator Morris rightly referred to the term as suffering. That should not be there. And as I read Clause 3 in Section 2 and 3, we intersperse suffering with the right term. The treaty actually says that we should use has a or as rather than suffering. And in some places in that clause, we did use the right term, and then we backslid to use suffering. But it is good to admit when you have, Senator Morris. So what we're saying about that backsliding in the composition of the text, Mr. President, good in some places, not good in others, is that I'm going to ask that we amend Clause 3 with the following. In new Section 51, in subsection 2b, we'll delete the word suffers from and substitute, therefore, the words has a. And then in B, in subsection 3a, delete the words suffered from and substitute, therefore, the word has. Mr. President, that will then make clean and proper the recommendation from Senator Morris. And Mr. President, if it pleases you. Thank you.
Minister is asking for the bill to be read a second time.
Absolutely, Mr. President. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The question is that the bill be read for a second time. Those in favor? Against?
A bill entitled An Act to Amend the Copyright Act read a second time.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. The Senate will now resolve itself into a committee of the whole Senate to consider the bill clause by clause. Thank you. Members would have gotten an amendment sheet as it relates to Clause 3. I put Clause 1. Those in favor? Against? Ayes have it. I put Clause 2. Those in favor? Against? Ayes have it. I put the amendment to Clause 3, which has been circulated. Those in favor? I put Clause 3 as, I'm sorry. Those against? I put Clause 3 as amended. Those in favor? Against? I put Clause 4, 5, and 6. Those in favor? Against? Ayes have it. I put the title and enacting clause. Those in favor? Against? Ayes have it. The question is that I do report the bill as having passed committee stage with one amendment. I know. One and one makes two. I do propose the question is that I report the bill as having passed committee stage with two amendments. Those in favor? Against? The ayes have it. The question is, and I do report the bill as having passed committee stage with two amendments. Minister?
Mr. President, I ask that the bill be read for a third time.
Members would have heard the question. Those in favor? Against? Madam Clerk?
A bill entitled An Act to Amend the Copyright Act read a third time and passed.
Minister?
Mr. President, I'm pleased to report that there's no intention to do further business today, so I'm asked that the Senate be adjourned for a date to be determined. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Minister. The question is that the Senate be adjourned for a date to be fixed. Those in favor? Against? This Honourable Senate now stands adjourned for a date to be fixed.